case. So picking up this little cable extension is going to solve this problem for you. Okay, so that's all the parts for the build. You'll find a part list in the description, and I'm going to include the options I've mentioned in that. So let's get on with the build. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to prepare the case. And in doing this, we want to remove panels or dust filters so we don't get in our way.
Tracks are fresh.
So we'll start off with removing the front panel. So it's held on with 4 thumb screws, which we just need to loosen.
So where the hell did you learn to track shit anyway?
Used to go elk hunting with my old man when I was a kid.
Front glass panel.
Ended up tracking shit for miles.
To remove the rear panel, we just need to loosen these 2 thumb screws. And then we should be able to slide the panel to the right hand side and lift out. Okay, so we'll have a look at the hard drive cage. We've got a little box marked accessories. Right off where your accessories box comes in most cases. So in here you're going to find all the actual screws that are going to secure your motherboard case, to secure your hard drives and SSDs, and also to secure your power supply.
Brother?
We also got some cable ties to help with cable management.
Son of a bitch can't aim worth a damn.
Some Velcro straps to help with cable management.
I'm fine.
So I'd already mentioned this little bracket where we're going to mount our 2
must be heading down there.
So we can go ahead and remove this.
Losing a lot of blood.
He's
not getting far. Come on.
And the bracket should just slide out. On the top of the case, there's a magnetic dust filter, which just lifts out of place. Okay, to remove the front panel, there's a little handle down here, and all we need to do is pull it towards ourselves. It is quite stiff, so it does need a good pull.
Bleeding out. Well, that's a hell of a way to go. It's slow. A lot of pain, but I suppose you'd know all about that.
She was still breathing when we found her, you piece of shit. I wasn't gonna waste a bullet not on her.
Hold on for a second. Where's the stash?
That's one of the nice things about this case.
If you tell us, unlike you, I can promise you we'll make it quick.
So removing the front panel after we build.
Don't look like you'd be suffering for too long. Leon, you got a little problem
here.
here.
In the front of the case, we've got a dust filter.
I can smell
all we need
your
to do
blood
is pull this bit to the
all
side.
the way down there.
And
I
actually
suppose that
lift out.
Huh? Torn apart.
Okay, so as I already mentioned, this case comes with 3 pure wings.
Guess he's gonna find out. Fuck you.
So we've got one at the front, one at the top,
wait.
and one at the rear.
All right, no.
Now, certainly the one at the top and the one at the rear of the case are going to get in the way when we're putting
Where?
In the cemetery.
In
the old cemetery.
Into the sockets on the motherboard. The one at the front probably won't cause any problems, but I do like to remove all the fans.
Do it.
To make the build a bit easier. So each fan is held on with 4 screws, so we just need to loosen these and then we'll be able to get the fans out.
Do it. You goddamn liar! Do it.
Tuck's gonna need something for the bounty. You did the right thing, bro.
Okay, that's the case ready to go.
Don't want to
Next
leave anyone
thing
to
is
the
to move
freaks.
on to the motherboard.
Not even a piece of
Okay,
shit
so
like
this is our
Leon.
Tomahawk B550 motherboard. So we want to do as much as we can with the motherboard outside the case before we install the motherboard into the case, because working it on the flat table is much easier than working in the tight and clean spaces of the case. So we're going to go ahead and install the CPU into the socket here. We're going to put our M.2 SSD into this socket here, and we're going to put our RAM into here, all before we put the motherboard into the case. As well, we're actually going to go ahead and put our CPU killer onto the motherboard first, and then put the motherboard into the case. So the first thing we want to do is install our CPU, which is going to go into this socket here in the middle of the motherboard. So to prepare the motherboard to receive the CPU, all we need to do is lift this retention clip all the way over to the right hand side. Okay, so this is our CPU, and what you'll notice is I'm holding the CPU by its sides. And the reason for that is I don't want to damage these gold pins that are on the bottom of the CPU. So if I was to touch the bottom of the gold pins, I could bend them, making our CPU absolutely useless. So when you take it out of the plastic packaging, make sure you hold it by its sides so you don't damage the little pins on the bottom. One of the other things I want you to notice about the CPU is if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little gold marking on it. None of the other corners on the CPU have this marking. So this is going to be important when we put the CPU in the socket. We're going to want to line this marking up with the marking on the socket. So we put the CPU in the right way round. Okay, so we'll take a closer look at the CPU socket. And what you'll notice on this corner here, there's a little triangle on the corner of the socket. And there's also a little white mark on the motherboard itself. So this is where we're going to have to line up the mark on the CPU. So we orientate the CPU in the socket the right way round. Okay, so I've got the CPU, I've got the mark here lined up with the mark on the socket. So to install it in the socket, all I want to do is hover over the socket and let the CPU fall into the socket. It's really important I don't go pressing down on the CPU because I'm going to bend the pins if it's not lined up properly. So you notice there the CPU is dropped into place, and if it doesn't, you just want to move it around a little bit till it falls into place. But don't be tempted to push it in, because all you're going to do there is damage your pins. Okay, so to secure the CPU in the socket, all we need to do is close this little lever. And we've now installed our CPU. Okay, so the next thing for us to do is install our M.2 SSD. And this motherboard has two M.2 SSD sockets. We've got one here and one here. And both these sockets have heat sinks on them to help keep the SSDs cool when they're running. Importantly, only the one at the top supports Gen 4 speeds. The one at the bottom only will go up to a maximum of Gen 3 speed. Now, even if you have a Gen 3 SSD, you're much better putting it into the top socket. As we've got a Gen 4 SSD, we're getting installed into this socket. So we need to remove these two little screws here to remove the heatsink and expose the socket. Okay, so now I should just be able to lift the heatsink off. Okay, so let's take a closer look at the socket. So this bit here is actually where our M.2 SSD is going to plug in. And this is the little standoff that's going to hold it in place. Normally in the motherboard box, you're going to have a little screw, which is then going to screw into the standoff and secure the M.2 SSD. And what you'll notice, there's empty places here, so we're able to move these little standoffs along so they're in the right place for our SSD. So the first thing for us to look is to check and see are these standoffs in the right place. So this is our SSD. And if we look, if we line it up with the socket, we're going to be able to screw it in here. So this one is in the right place for us. Okay, to install the SSD, all we need to do is insert it at a slight angle into the socket. Then when we lower it down, we're going to be able to screw it into place. Okay, so we've got a little screw here that comes with our motherboard, and we just line it up in the socket. And we should be able to screw things into place. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is just put the heatsink back on, but before we do that, there's just a little layer of plastic that we need to remove. Okay, that's the M.2 SSD installed. Next, we need to do is install the RAM. Okay, so the RAM is going to go into these sockets over here on the right hand side of the motherboard. What you'll notice is there's 4 RAM slots, but the kit of RAM that we got only came with 2 RAM sticks. So we can't just pick or choose which of these sockets we insert them into. And if you look in the motherboard manual, it recommends that you install the 2 sticks of RAM into the second socket away from the CPU and the 4th socket away from the CPU first, but we've only got the 2 sticks of RAM. Okay, so this is also marked in the motherboard for us here. It's saying if we're running 2 sticks, the first we should be installed here and here. Okay, so this is our RAM, and one of the things I want you to notice is that the gold connectors that are going to plug into the motherboard are at the bottom. but they're not of equal lengths. So the one over the right hand side is longer than the one over the left hand side. So it's important we line this up properly.
Hey, hold up. I want to search this camp, see if I can't find something to fix up this
motherboard to
crash.
receive the RAM, all we need to do is put the little clips on each of the sockets that we're going to install the RAM into. Next we need to line the RAM up with the socket, making sure we've got the long side and the long side on the socket. Just line it up in the socket. Making it the right way around, and then all we need to do is apply some firm pressure and it should lock into place. Now it's just a matter of repeating the process with the second stick of RAM. So we can line it up in the socket and then apply a bit of pressure and it locks and clicks into place. So we've now installed the RAM. Okay, the next thing for us to do is install the CPU killer. And although I'm using the Dark Pro 4 for this build, I did mention I would show you how to use the stock AMD killer that comes with our 3700X. So let's take a closer look at this killer. Okay, so really all this killer is, it's a fan on top of the sink. So this is what's going to keep our CPU cool. Importantly, down the bottom of the CPU killer, we've got thermal paste pre-applied. So nothing has to add any additional thermal paste. But we need to be really careful to don't damage the pre-applied thermal paste, so don't be touching this at all or let it rub off on anything else during the build process. The next thing to do is how is this going to clip onto our motherboard. It's going to use these little clips onto the clips that are on the motherboard. Also coming off the CPU killer, we've got a 4-pin fan connector which we're going to plug into our CPU fan header on the motherboard. And have a look over the side of the CPU killer. We've got some little sockets here. Pull this clip off. So we've got a 4-pin and also a 3-pin socket here. And this comes with 2 different cables. So we've got one which is a standard 12-volt RGB cable, which is going to plug into your 12-volt RGB header on your motherboard, and it has the 4 little sockets, so it's going to plug into here. So that's it, plugged in. If you want to control the RGB on this header with the 4-pin header on your motherboard and use it with the motherboard software. So the other option that we have is there's also a USB cable supplied. And if we look at the end of it, it's got the 3 pins, so it's going to plug in over this side here. On the other end of the cable, we've got a USB plug, and we're going to need to plug this into one of the USB 2.0 headers on our motherboard. We're then going to have to download the software, and have to link to that in the description, and then we can use that software to control the RGB lighting killer. So importantly, you don't want to use both of these, you want to use one or the other. First, if you install the killer, we want to lower it down and line this little clip up. Okay, so that side's locked in. Okay, so now all we need to do is line this little clip up on the other side, so we just put a bit of pressure on it. So that's now locked into place. Okay, now to secure the killer, all we're going to have to do is lift this lever all the way over the other side. Okay, so that's now locked into place, and the CPU killer is nice and secure. In fact, we can actually lift it up and lift it down. Okay, so the next thing for us to do is to plug the cable, which is going to allow the fan the power to spin round, but also allow our motherboard to adjust the speed of the fan depending on how hot the CPU is. So we're going to plug it into the CPU fan header, which is this little 4-pin connector here, and it's mounted to your CPU fan. Okay, if we look closely at the fan header, we'll notice there's a little bit of plastic over this side, and the little connector here has 2 little bits of plastic on it as well. So these need to line up. We'll line them up on this side, and then just push, and it should lock into place. Now the only other thing, we don't want to leave this cable here looking on tidally, so we're just going to tuck it in away and make things look a little bit more tidy. Okay, so at the moment, if we were to plug this in, our CPU cooler would work. It would have power and the motherboard would be able to control the speed of the fan, but we wouldn't have any way to control the RGB. And as we've mentioned, two ways of doing this. We can either use USB with separate software, or we can use a 12-volt 4-pin RGB header on the motherboard and allow us to use our motherboard software to control the RGB. So I'll show you both of these. So if we're going to use the USB one, first of all, we're going to plug it into the 3-pin connector on the bottom of the killer. Plug that in. Okay, so that's now secure in place. So ideally with this cable, you would want to route it back around the motherboard, out of the way, and then we've got our USB headers, 2-pin headers down the bottom of the motherboard. If we look at this pin, there's one hole missing here, and there's one pin missing here, so we have to line it up the right way. And then all we need to do once it's lined up is just a matter of pushing it in. Ideally, like I said, this cable is going to be coming out the back of the motherboard, coming around, and coming back down the bottom, so it's not going to run on the front of your motherboard. And I'll put a link in the description to the software that you're going to need to use this with if you are going to design this route. Okay, so the other way that we can control the lighting on the CPU killer is to use one of the 4-pin 12-volt non-addressable RGB headers on our motherboard. And our motherboard has two, so there is one here and one here. And this would be the method I would recommend if you're planning on using stock CPU killer. And the reason for that is our motherboard has RGB on it, so we're going to have to download MSI's RGB software to allow us to control the lighting on the motherboard. It's also going to let us control the lighting on the RAM and let us control the lighting on the CPU killer as long as we plug it into these headers. So for me, it just makes sense to use the one RGB software rather than two different software. So like I said, if you're going to get interested, this would be the method I would recommend. Okay, so before I come on to show you how to plug everything in, there's a couple of things I want to mention about RGB headers on motherboards. So there's two different types of RGB headers. The one we're going to use, as we mentioned, is a 4-pin 12-volt non-addressable RGB header. This motherboard also has a different type of RGB header. There's 3-pin addressable 5-volt RGB headers as well. So we've got one here, and there's also another 3-pin one. I think this there is at the top of the motherboard. So these are not interchangeable. If your hardware requires a 4-pin 12-volt non-addressable header, and you plug it into the addressable header, you're actually going to damage your hardware, so you have to be really, really careful here. So you're going to have to use one of the 4-pin headers to have to use interchangeable. Okay, so what we want to do is plug the cable into the bottom of the CPU killer. And then we're going to need to plug the other end of the bar into one of the 4-pin headers on our motherboard. So as I've already mentioned to you, this cable is going to be routed around the back of the motherboard and back in into the case. So we're going to use this 4-pin header here. Okay, so we get you a close-up look at this cable. And what you'll notice, this pin over the left-hand side has a little arrow on it. And that is to highlight the 12-volt pin. So it's important it's lined up with a 12-volt pin on the motherboard. If we have a look at the motherboard, what we will notice that our 12-volt pin is the one all the way over to the left-hand side. So if we line our cable up with that, and then we'll push, and it will lock into place. Okay, so that's the stock CPU killer installed, and we'll now be able to use our motherboard's RGB software not only to control the lighting on the motherboard itself, the RAM, but also the CPU killer. Okay, so the first step in installing the Dark Rock Pro 4 is to remove these brackets from the motherboard. We just need to loosen each of these 4 screws. And then we should be able to see the brackets out. So importantly, don't throw these out, put them into your motherboard box. So if you ever come to change your CPU killer in the future or to sell your motherboard, you're not going to have to go searching for them. Okay, so the first thing we're going to have to do is put the mounting brackets onto the stock motherboard backplate. So in the killer package itself, you get one labeled A and B, so that's the packaging you're going to have to open. One of the other nice things you get in the box with the CPU killer is a magnetic screwdriver. So I've been using this capability so far, and having the magnetic tip of the screwdriver makes it much easier than using the screws. So I recommend you open the box right at the start of your build and get the screwdriver out. Okay, so we need to put these up with spacers into the back plate. In our little bracket, it has two holes on each side. One of them is labelled AM4, which is the one on the top, so we're going to put the screws through the AM4 marked place on the socket and line them up then with the spacers. And then all we need to do is screw that into place. Okay, just the same process on the top then. Okay, so we've got the screws in through the holes labelled AM4, but this is an AM4 socket that we have. And then just screw things into place. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is add some thermal paste for the CPU. And if you look online, there's a whole variety of different ways people do this. Everyone has their own reasons why their one is best. I prefer just to put a pea-sized amount in the middle of the CPU, and then when the killer is applied, that will squash the paste right in the middle of the CPU. So thermal paste comes with a killer in a little syringe, so all we need to do is squeeze a little bit out into the middle of the CPU. So that looks about right to me. Okay, so the next thing is just to line up the CPU killer with the bracket. Importantly, don't forget to remove the plastic sticker from the bottom of the CPU killer. Okay, so we need to make sure the VCAT logo is the right way up, and then it's just a matter of aligning this with the centre of the socket. Next we want to align this little metal bracket up with the CPU killer. It just goes in through the middle, and then it line goes up. Now we need to put two screws, one down here and one at the back, to secure the killer to the motherboard. The problem is we need to get the screwdriver in through the holes into the killer, so we're going to have to remove these two little bits from the top of the killer. This will just unscrew. Okay, so importantly at the top, we're able to fit the screwdriver through the hole to lock the screw. So what we need to do is line the screw up here, feed the screwdriver through, and then pass the screw into the screwdriver. And then we are able to line the holes up at the bottom and secure things in place. So I'm just going to loosely tighten that one and then repeat the same process with the one at the back. Okay, so I'm just going to alternate, tighten each piece up a little bit at a time. But also you don't want to tighten one up and then not have the other one tightened. So it's going to pull the killer one way on the socket. So a couple of turns of each at a time. Okay, so that's that back one fully screwed in. Screwed in as well. Okay, to finish off, all we need to do is screw these little caps at the top back in. Okay, so that's the heatsink onto the motherboard. The next thing to do is insert the fan onto the heatsink. And this CPU killer comes with two different fans. We've got a 135mm fan to go into the middle between the two towers. And we've got also a 120mm fan which goes in this side of the tower. It's smaller because it means it's going up into the top of the RAM itself. So before we put the fans on, it's important to talk a little bit about airflow through fans. So fans have a front and a back. So this is the front of the fan. You can see it's got the logo and it doesn't have any bits of plastic blocking the fan. On the back, you tend to have these bits of plastic and the fan looks clearly through the wrong way round. So with a fan, air is going to come in through the front and out the back. So it's important we install these fans on the heatsink the way we want air to come through the case. So when we go on to look at our case, air is going to come in through the front of the case, which is going to be the right hand side. We want it to go through the heatsink and then out the back of the case, which is going to be the left hand side over here. So it's important when we put our fans onto the heatsink, we want the front of the fan at the right hand side and the back of the fan at the left hand side. So it's going to be pushing cool air coming into the case through on the front and two little adapters. So both our fans are going to be able to be controlled by the motherboard and spin at the same speed. So I'm going to plug this in right at the start because I find it makes things a little bit easier. So the other thing we're going to have to be careful with is the amount of cable and where the cable comes out. So I would like the cable to be, the CPU header is at the top of the motherboard, so I would like most of the cable to be hidden and only a little bit to come out the top. So I'm going to have the fan installed with the cable wrapped around here, and only this little bit at the top is going to come out. It's going to make things much tidier.